Hi, it's Jerry Roberts back with another community conversation in Journal of the Plague Year. And today we are talking with City Council member Mike Jordan. Mike, thanks so much for joining us here at City Hall right now.
My pleasure to be here, Jerry. I was getting worried you were going to put that chicken caricature up and name it Mike Jordan.
No, there's only one chicken left. The sixth of seven, and we'll find out who the mysterious seventh is. So listen, here we are. We are in the worst public health crisis since the First World War, and one of the worst economic downturns since the Great Depression, and we have a great deal of unrest about the issue of race. So we have all these sort of overlapping crises. How are you doing personally, and how do you think the city's doing in navigating through all this?
Well, if you told me, I guess a year ago, in the throes of ramping up the path to office, that this was going to be my first 6 or 7 months, or longer, obviously. This would be what my first 6 months look like. I would have might have had a few choice words for you, but just doing as well as everybody else is. Just keeping my head down, trying to work, trying to affect positively the things that can be affected, and the silly dynamic of it really is just the uncertainty of everything. I mean, you try and plan, and that's screwed up a week later. You don't plan, and nobody's happy with that. So there's really no plan, I think.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things about your election, I think, is that you really came up in the city in sort of the traditional way that council members did when we elected citywide. You did have long service on the planning commission, on the water commission, so you knew a lot about City Hall. But now you arrive, and your colleagues, for the most part, are really more creatures of the district system, where they don't have the sort of depth of experience. How frustrating is that for you, and how are you navigating that?
You sound like you've been sitting at the dinner table. So it's frustrating. I mean, I heard, election time, post-election, that, oh, you're the insider. This will be what you can do. You know how to do it. I pretty much think it's more of a burden right now coming up that way and having that experience than it is a plus. Whether it's me or the environment, I will readily admit I have not found my cantering speed yet to just move along and do things. I don't really think what's going on in the world today really was the preparation for that was not my last 10 years. And you also, I think, accurately touch on the dynamics of district elections, and certainly as being an observer, we are clearly in the district election dynamics government right now, and it is more clear at this time than it has been on the several year run up by incremental elections to get here. So it's frustrating, but I'm sure there's people who this is all they've known is district elections, and they're frustrated too. I don't think I'm alone in my frustration.
Well, there's a lot of talk, a lot of behind the scenes chatter and so on about Paul Casey, and, Ed St. George has got this petition, the developer Ed St. George, to get rid of him. And, Paul's not a visionary. I talked to your predecessor.
Yes, you did. I saw that
last week about it. And, he just thought Paul's really getting a bad rap, and he's doing very well. What's your assessment of how he's doing, and kind of the whole political landscape around that?
This is where I just hold up my Pat McElroy and Randy Rouse signs and just mimic what you heard last week. Randy and Pat said, I think, what's plan B? I'm a little more gruff than that. I just think people are full of crap, thinking that if you're unhappy, that now is the time to start jettisoning executive team members or department heads of the staff. So I'll lay that out for you with George Buell in particular. So we're now going to look at 6 or 9, maybe a year, 12 months worth of recruiting and finding somebody to come to Santa Barbara. The job pool is definitely going to be affected by whoever those people are, just Googling what's going on in Santa Barbara and trying to say, oh, really, honey, we really want to go step into that right now, or we don't. And then once that, whoever that person is gets hired and is here, we're Santa Barbara. So it's going to be a year, maybe 2, and that until that person is actually got their feet in on the ground and is able to start working effectively. So, you know, it's not that there's what's plan B, it's just really what the hell is your plan? Because now you have put the rest of us and you, community members, in the position of not having that department head person for essentially 3 years. And I would pose to you that I would have personally, not my call, but personally, I would have much rather worked with the incumbent over that 3-year period and tried to make that process and whatever the shortcomings were much more effective and take care of them.
Yeah, I want to ask you about community development, but let me just stay on this process about how Buell basically got pushed out. Yes, he formally resigned, but there was a lot of heat coming from several of your colleagues, including Oscar, who was on my show and said, you know, not basically, he said.
He exactly said he has to go before he was told to go.
Yeah, if he does, you know, if Paul doesn't fire him, we will. I don't recall that sort of sensibility being expressed by council members in the past. Did that shock you?
Yes, as you know. I think I've said that to you once somewhere, but yeah, I found it both shocking on a personal dynamics level and also just on a procedural level. Paul hires and fires the department heads. The council tells Paul what to do. I can't imagine being an elected official and breaking through that level to make public comments about employees while they're still employed. I think it borders on illegal, and it certainly was inappropriate. So I think what you're seeing probably is a small, very vocal group, development-oriented, looking for heads to scalp. There are council members who are susceptible to that type of chatter. You know, we could talk another time about how many of the people that are really unhappy per se with either Paul Casey or community development even have a zip code where they're a voter in town. Okay, clearly self-focused on their self-interest. So, and when we're talking about those general dynamics with community development, the silly secret in the room that nobody talks about anyhow is, yes, there's things to improve. Yes, the development community might have people that really want to improve them and are very vocal to the extent of sometimes being obscene. But for every one of those, there's 3 white middle-aged voters in San Roque, the Mesa, or those type of districts that are happy with the way Santa Barbara processes growth. They are slow growth, no growth. We like the look and feel of Santa Barbara, and they don't have a problem with that. And that's the balancing act. And the balancing act of how to work with both of those sides doesn't work well when you're pressuring people to jettison people, cause a vacuum, and then just see what comes into that vacuum without a plan.
What do you understand? I mean, what do you hear specifically? How define what people are perceiving as the problem with community development, and do you agree with that critique?
Well, so I used to always think there was another side to the story, and so it was always a 50% thing. The city's half at fault, and you, the developer, are half at fault. I've adjusted that a little, 10 or 15 points. I think it's definitely the burden on the problem right now is on the city's shoulders, more so than the development community. And I see it 2 different ways. Well, maybe there's probably a zillion ways. One, I see it as that we've lost a sense of customer service, just in normal people dynamics, customer service, and we need to work on that. And the other is the world is just not black and white anymore. All this stuff you alluded to at the start of your talk, so whether it's economic unrest, social unrest, equity unrest, whatever, and then the pandemic, whatever all these things are jumbled up in a bucket. And then all of that is changing at such a rapid rate. It changes way faster than when you were a little 15-year-old and you could make a plan and you could implement that plan for 5 or 10 years and nothing came along to mess it up. So we by nature, a city by nature, wants to wake up every day and the signals work, the police are on the road, the roads look good, I turn the water on, the water works. So it's the equivalent of a really big ocean liner that doesn't turn fast on purpose because we want that stability. We don't want the ups and the downs and the peaks and the valleys of our national leadership Twitter account. We want to be able to wake up and know we're going to all be there and be able to go to work in the morning, do our things, take care of our families. The world's fighting that right now. The world just moves at such a rapid rate. Things come up, they get magnified crazily with media such as yours and other media that's instantly online. And I think that's part of the struggle with any process that's going on with the city, regardless of whether it's community development, police department, city hall, wherever it is. It's just the nimbleness that's required to work in today's dynamics is not the historical method of government. And we have to do a better job at that.
So when you reference police services, the lights are on, the street lights are working and so on, do you agree with what Randy Rouse and Pat McElroy said, that basically 90% of the city government is functioning very well?
Yeah, totally. But I think take the other percent, the small percent, and it's just magnified to appear to be a greater percent. I mean, when you actually think what you need every day, what you and I or other community members need every day to go about our lives, make sure our family's healthy, safety, make sure we have jobs, do stuff we want to do, easily 90% of that being accomplished. Does that lessen that 10% that needs to be addressed? No. But that 10%, wherever you want to spin the dial and have whatever area you want to have that dial end up on, is blown exponentially out of proportion at any point in time. And then just seems like lately, at least for the last 4 months, every one of those that happens is this other first in a generation type of event.
Yeah. So in terms of how community development does work, we have the controversy over 711 North Milpa Street, which was a long time controversial project to get approved. It finally did. And then here comes, a new ownership team that says, well, we want to make it different. We want to make it higher, but we're going to throw in 20, I guess, units of,
16.
Say again?
16
units of affordable housing. But to do that, we need to jump the line, essentially, or at least we're not going to go back to square one, and we want to short circuit this whole famous Santa Barbara process. You're a guy who knows that process very well, but you voted for that. You voted for the special agreement with 711 Milpas. Why?
I think it's an intriguing starting point for the discussion. And if you watch the discussion at council, I voted for the concept, but I'm pretty sure I said the devil's in the details. And I'm in. So I would ask you, when was the last time you saw market rate based developer provided affordable housing? Small A is what we call it, because it's not subsidized by the government, but it's going to be 80 to 120 area median income by deed affordable housing. So 80 units and 16 of them will be that. Now I'll answer your question. Never in our lifetime, yours or mine, because you're significantly older than me, so it'd be a longer period of time.
Excuse me.
Right? But never. So this is the first one. So that's the plus. There's other things I think that are better about it. Face value, without talking about the details. The architecture is an improvement. The parking is probably an improvement. Haven't seen the plan yet. The bad side is it's going to get 7 feet taller. I think the the bulk, as you look, you know, as a box on the street, I think the bulk grows sideways as it goes up also. So those are all bad. You know, the part where you say it's going to skip the line is not going to happen on my boat. Okay. So the development team actually specifically said, well, we'll go to ABR, but we're only going once, and they can't talk about size, bulk, scale, or compatibility, which is why go to ABR. That's not going to happen. The process clearly allows us in a negotiation with the developer to tell them and get them to agree exactly what we are going to have them do. And they're going to agree to do that if it makes sense for them. We're going to let them have their concessions if it's of such a community benefit that we can balance those concessions with the gain the community receives. And I think it's a great starting point. Clearly what was there is still festering with the east side. Clearly we need that type of housing desperately, and time will tell whether we have the right set of applicants that are willing to give the city what the city thinks we need in return for how the applicant wants to build the project.
And here you really do see the district dynamic at play, because Alejandra Gutierrez, who represents that district, is Foursquare for the change and for the development agreement and so on. Was that why it passed unanimously, do you think?
No, I think so. So those things called development agreements have been part of the city process for decades and decades and decades. They've only been invoked a couple times in the last 30 years. But I think even back when Fess Parker donated the land in front of Fess Parker's and Chase Palm Park, I think that was a development agreement. He had another one for I think the hostels. I guess Fess was just synonymous with development agreements. And then he had another one for the hole in the ground behind the green fence down on Cabrillo Boulevard right now. But so the concept of the development agreement is not to get around the process, so to speak, get around design review or get around planning commission for land use decisions. The idea behind a development agreement is we have a project that we think will meet some need or set of needs the city has. But that project would be constrained by normal things the city has on its book: a height limit, setbacks, parking requirements. We'd like to get in front of the city and initiate a discussion on, you know, horse trading, if you will, on here's what we're going to give. Can we get this? And just go down that list and see if both the council can come to an agreement on a broad framework. And then once that's accomplished, then it goes off to ABR in this particular case because of the location. And then it comes to Planning Commission, and they all get to chew it around and do what they do. And then eventually comes back to council, and it has to pass the litmus test with 5 council members at that time. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
So if I hear what you're saying, the 16 units are really a floor and not a ceiling, that you see that as just...
Definitely. It could be any number. So the starting number is 0 for a development like that. There's no, actually, if he started it today, we now have an inclusionary 10% requirement. So the starting number today, if he started over a new project, he'd have to put in 8. So they're offering to double those number of units. And they're offering to put them in a location, just talking conceptually, on the east side, where those units are the type of units you need. Those are, you know, I've heard the applicants say they're going to be police officers and school teachers. Well, I haven't done the math yet, but I don't think a police officer starts at 120% of 44,000 a year, which is what AMI was last year. So I don't think police officers are going to qualify for that. But these are your checkers at Trader Joe's or a supermarket. These are your people working in real jobs, making $40,000, $35,000 a year out in the community. And I think there's a need for housing in that part of the community. The kicker is, what's the rest of the thing look like? How does it act? How does it work on the ground? Those are all details to work out. And The applicant team knows the dollars and cents. We know what we think we want. Somewhere you got to get to a meeting of the minds on that.
All right. Okay. Let me ask you about another issue. The Black Lives Matters issues that you guys have been dealing with in terms of the police department. How do you think the police department is doing in Santa Barbara, and how is the chief doing? And you know, the resolution that you all passed, the council passed, had a lot of references to Minneapolis and to Atlanta and so on, and things that happened elsewhere. Do you think that was really applicable to the way that the police conduct themselves in Santa Barbara?
Well, I'll give you the caveat first, because you or I have absolutely no business coming up with the defining answer to that question. Neither of us are a person of color. Neither of us are whatever other category that is affected by the dynamics of enforcement, both historically and today. So I don't pretend to know the answer to that question. From my perspective, which is not the perspective that is the discussion point, but from my perspective, I think the police in this particular city do a really good job. I think the police chief does a really good job. One of my barometers is, I think you can count on less than one hand in any year the amount of times in the city something has involved a gun. All right. So you don't have to drive very far south or very far north to it's not daily or weekly. And I'm thankful for that. And I believe we're blessed because of our geographical separation, but we're also blessed with a police department that gets out and does community policing, does restorative policing, a female police chief that brings experience working in big inner cities such as San Diego, where those things were prevalent, and is keenly aware of both a desire and her particular will to keep those at bay as long as possible. But how all that relates to what people of color, people of a discriminatory background relate to the police, or what their experiences have been with the police in this town, I have no idea. And I take it to heart and at face value when those people can relate historical treatment that is different than I would be treated if I was pulled over or I was stopped or I was asked to do something. And I understand that. I don't think I understand that. I recognize that. And I think it's a credible yet unfortunate set of happenings that have led us to this point where we're finally seemingly going to do something about it. Long overdue.
And then on a budget related question, voters approved Measure C in 2017, sales tax increase on themselves to pay for infrastructure, specifically road repairs, and according to the campaign, a new police station. Now, there was $2 million that was in the budget that was pulled back or redirected to the library. And I understand that the police station is not at a point of planning and development where it really needed that money. But are you still of the belief that Measure C money should, as a priority, go to build a new police station?
So first, I want to say that your friend Josh Molina's headline and first paragraph on that topic was totally incorrect. The money for the police station was not pulled back in this budget year. The money for the police station was already not in the draft budget report done in April. It had already been moved out of there because there was nowhere to spend that money yet. The project's not ready. It's still going through whatever it's going through, the scoping, the archaeological, all that kind of stuff. And that $2 million was for a stage where we anticipate we're not going to be there until very, very, very late in the next fiscal year. So that money was already pulled back. It was not pulled back as a result of any of the talk for Black Lives Matter or any of the defunding talk or any of that. So that said, I am firmly committed to seeing a new police station built, preferably in the preferential location of choice, and that Measure C will be used to do that. Sometime on my planning commission career, maybe about in the middle of it, so the 5th year, I was able, before the run-up started towards the Measure C, I was invited to tour the police station with several planning commissioners. And that building is a building ready to fall down. The basement of that building where the locker rooms are just like living in, I don't know, the belly of a ship with leaking pipes above you, water on the ground all the time, mold all around you. It is not a building that can survive, whether both structurally or from a use standpoint, for many more years. So we need a new police station.
Okay. The mayor has taken a lot of heat from the business community, in part because of the makeup and the process by which she put together her business task force, and also from Black Lives Matters. As you know, there was quite an incident about that. How do you think she's doing in providing leadership for the city in this really crazy time of overlapping crisis?
I think she's doing okay. So I think the challenge is what's happening right now is a once in 2 generations event from the pandemic. It was preceded by the blow up of State Street and the economics there. It was then followed in the midst of it by the social unrest and the uprising there. I think these are incredibly dynamic times, and people, whether you're an elected, you're a staff member, or you're a community member, you're just struggling to adapt. I will share an analogy with you, and that's the proliferation of emails all of us get at any one point in time over any one subject. And that could be speeding on Cliff Drive, my neighbor's dog barking, fireworks going off. I got my first one last week that State Street is not looking like it is State Street in conformance. The tables and chairs at each restaurant are different, okay? People are hurting and they're stuck at home. I'm on my 3.5 month of working out of my house. My son-in-law is doing the same thing too, where we have more time to look around us and ponder. We have more crazy video blogs that help us figure out what we want to ponder about and react to. And I think it's just an incredibly difficult time right now to be in a leadership role and to try and be proactive and not appear just to be reactive. And hopefully we get through this, and however long this is going to take, and we can begin to get some sense of normalcy and some type of foundation to where we can start taking steps to begin to bring us out of this and see things beginning to reach a balance again, instead of everything just being all over on the shouting end of things. So I think she's doing okay. I mean, I think it's been very hard on her. It's the dynamics up here on the 2nd floor at City Hall on the council side are tough. There's 3 new councilmen, well, 2 brand new councilmen people, 2 others that are very new, didn't even have to run for election. The second half of City Hall on the other side on the 2nd floor is the executive team suites, and they're hunkered down because they're just getting browbeat over whatever they do. Open the window shade, people yell. Close the window shade, people yell. Doesn't matter what they do. So I think it's just an incredibly dynamic and challenging time. And I think to really say that this is the litmus test of your 4 years or 8 years or whatever it's going to be, I think is just totally unfair and inappropriate that we, as most members of the community, are working our hardest, as are our staff, to work us through this period of time and come out on the other end in the best way we can.
All right. Last question, just to go back to State Street. I mean, what's your prognosis, for the economy? Obviously retail is taking a torpedo and we're done. And now we have all of these difficulties with tourism, which is the other foundational piece of the economy, local economy. Restaurants are open, no, they're closed, no, pick it up, no, you can have a table. I mean, how many of these businesses are going to come back, and what's the long-term, in terms of 1 to 5 years? I mean, long-term prognosis for the economy.
So my hope is that we take this as an opportunity. What we're actually seeing, this misery we're in right now, and it's actually an opportunity. And an example of that opportunity right now would be the restaurants and/or bars, and hopefully maybe even some of the retail moving out onto State Street proper. And this is something that we can build on and adjust. State Street as a retail mall was too lengthy for this day and time. I see State Street in the next decade or something turning into 3 or 4 zones where you have clearly a food and beverage or entertainment zone, you have a smaller retail zone, you might have a cultural or art zone, and you might have a historical zone. How that all works out, we've started this experiment there. We're on the verge of redeveloping De La Guerra Plaza. There's commitments we can begin to make internally in our processes and municipal code to support these things. I had a small working group that got together right before the mayor's task group started, and we actually then fed some of our ideas having to do with what are some of the immediate barriers to either new businesses opening, old businesses reopening, or a change of use in an existing building. And most of those are working their way through staff right now, but they're going to come back to being adopted by council. And that's a particular way we can accomplish 2 things. One, we can help cure the immediate ill, but in the long term too, we can start to recognize that many of those things that have been put in a book and left in a book for 100 years don't really reflect what's on the ground anymore. And they need to start being played with and talked with, and hopefully in a safe environment. One of my biggest frustrations is just the inability to try something and fail and then just be head on a post or head on a stick about it, rather than just say, hey, it was an idea, we tried it, we failed, now here's the next idea, we'll try to fix it. The city as a process tends to want to do something and then sort of wash their hands and walk away and not look at it for 2 or 3 years again until the crescendo rises to a unimaginable amount. We need to be much more nimble. You heard me say that before. It's the real term is adaptive management. We need to try things, be ready to look at them, try them again, fix them, replicate the successes, and fix the ones that aren't successes as we go along. And part of that has to be, you have to have a staff that feels safe, that they can suggest and implement those things. And you have to have electeds that feel safe, that they can also come up with those ideas with the community and try them. And then if they just don't work out well, they can't just be pillared by half the community that wasn't going to like it in the first place. So that's my hope. And I see this as a contrary to how I usually am in our family. I'm usually not the optimist. I'm the cup half empty. And I see this as an opportunity to work on some of the problems that were already there, to be ready to come out of this stronger than ever. My big worry, of course, looking at the numbers for people like you and me that are our age, is we're not done and we're going to see a surge again in the winter when the flu season comes back. That is my absolute worry as to the worst thing that can happen, and why I just get so frustrated with seeing people who are just ignoring the simplest of things, and that's staying apart from people even while you go out and do stuff, and declining to put a mask on. It just drives me bananas, and I just see that leading to an eventual resurge of the numbers to the point where the governor says we're going to have to go stepping backwards instead of forward. And I just don't know how we do that and start this whole process over again and say, well, in a year from now, we'll start to try and come out of this. So I'm hoping if we get one good message out of today's half hour, I hope that's a good one. That the little selfishness over I can go out and chum around and not wear a mask and get as close to people I want to is so self-serving and does nothing beneficial for the community.
All right. All right. Well, Mike, thank you so much. You always say what's on your mind, and that's why I enjoy talking to you. And, people say that you're the only person grumpier than me, but I'm hearing all this optimism out of you. I'm not quite sure what to make of it. You're not running for mayor, are you? I asked all your colleagues.
Yes, out of everybody, don't you?
I do.
So my wife told me to make sure when I was on the show that there weren't two grumpy old men on it, just one. Okay, so I'm trying to do my part. Okay.
All right, Mr. Sunshine.
And absolutely not. I'm not running for mayor.
Okay.
You
All
can
right.
take that one off on your list. Okay.
All right. Mike Jordan, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, and be well, stay safe.
Thank you.